Hello, welcome back to Rough Cut Film Review. This is the second part of the very quick two-part Nightmare on Elm Street special edition. So I've just talked about, there were some pretty slack films. We got diminishing returns. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the new Nightmare, because that was quite interesting. I think that came out in 1994. And the idea of this one was this sort of concept that they're talking about making a new Freddie film. So we're in reality now. We're with the actors who were in the first film. Wes Craven is talking in the film about making the film within the film, making a new Freddie film. So Freddie is coming out into the real world. He's breaking through, and he's using we find out in the film, but he's using something with which to come through and be made flesh and blood and be made real. And there's loads of really interesting things. It's not actually that great a film, in all honesty, but there's interesting stuff there about how this ancient horror is actually sort of manifesting itself and sort of latching onto a film. It's playing on old-fashioned scares, which is something I alluded to earlier when I sort of said, well, they're not doing anything terribly new. They're putting a fresh spin on it, but it's this sort of ancient horror kind of concepts, that it's tapping into, to sort of almost primeval stuff. So, I mean, the film was pretty, it looks like a film from the early to mid 1990s, and that's not a compliment. But it was decent. It's interesting. And really, I suppose the main point here is the fact that you can see Craven's mind turning on this concept of horror. And subsequently, he went on to make, the very famous Scream films. Didn't need to be, a series again, but very, very clever, interesting take on horror. And I think it was with A New Nightmare that he started to, the cogs started moving in his head, and he started coming up with this concept of turning the horror genre again on its head. And subsequently, of course, we've had The Cabin in the Woods, which I enjoyed so much. We then had Freddie versus Jason, which was the poor later films they ditched the real horror stuff. They were still gory, but they were going for sort of camp, cheesy, sort of comic, almost slapstick, really. And for me, that's a massive mistake. Although, what I'd have done with them, I just don't know. I just wish they weren't made. But anyway, we then went into Freddie versus Jason, which was, one of those sort of mashups, franchise mashups, which these days are pretty common. But back in, I think it was 1997, it was a fairly new idea to take two completely disparate characters and throw them together. Initially, the first sort of 10 minutes, I thought, well, this isn't too bad. This isn't such a terrible idea. The idea of Freddie manipulating Jason to bring him back, these two sort of horror icons. But unfortunately, the whole thing just turns into, and I should have known really, it turns into just these two guys hitting each other for no particular point. They're just sort of endlessly fighting each other, killing the odd teen, in lieu of any sort of tension or shocks or any of the stuff that made these franchises famous for initially, at the very least. So it's all a bit disappointing. I just had a quick look on IMDb to get the sort of scores to have an idea of where we are. So the first A Nightmare on Elm Street film is the highest, with 7.5, which sounds about right to me. A solid score, not amazing, but a good score. The Dream Warriors, which was the third one, which I very much liked, got 6.3. Again, sounds about right. Freddy vs. Jason, well, I got 5.7. I'd have probably given it a bit lower. A New Nightmare, which was interesting-ish, got 6.3. That sounds about right. Things like The Dream Master, which, I didn't like. That was the fourth one. That was 5.4. I think that's about right. And then after that, they get worse, and I think it was Freddy's Dead is the sixth one. That was, pretty poor, really. I got 4 point something. I didn't even bother to make a note of it. But yeah, that was pretty awful. What surprised me, though, actually, was A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, which was Freddy's Revenge, the body horror one. On IMDb, that's only got 5.1, so It's not as popular, and Craven had absolutely nothing to do with that. So it's probably something of the black sheep. But I can only say what I like and what I don't like, and I thought 2 was really good. So there we go. I mean, it's just a brief look, really, I suppose you could say, the Freddie Krueger films, and I certainly think it's worth a go to, if get a couple of friends round for the night. And I mean, I'm sure you can pick up the DVDs for literally £3 in HMV or something like this. And if you just pick if you can get the whole box set on the cheap, which I'm sure you can, it's probably worth it. But you don't need the later films. So if you can pick up 1, 2, and 3, that is a cracking night of beer, pizza, and some really inventive horror. And that does get forgotten, actually, because it's become so sort of tired and cliched, the Freddy Krueger thing, because of the later films. It's unfortunate how much it overshadows how good the first 3 were. I know alternative opinions are available, particularly of the second one, but for me those 3 films were really good, and there is interesting reasons. After you've seen the first one, you've not seen it all. 2 and 3 add something a bit different, put a bit of a different spin on it. So there we are. That'll do it, I suppose. So that's the rough cut Nightmare on Elm Street special. I hope you enjoyed it. And kind regards, Christopher Thomas. Just while I'm at it, a bit of an addendum I completely forgot to mention. I mean, the reason that we got so many sequels was because it made an outrageous amount of money. And, the Nightmare on Elm Street films are largely credited with building New Line Cinema as a film company. The money that they brought in was huge. So whether Craven liked it or not, they were going to make more films because, the numbers say so. And if you check the amounts of money those films made in IMDb, even the really poor ones didn't cost that much to make and made it back in spades. So you can understand from a business point of view why they didn't kill the golden goose. They just kept it churning out. So from a sort of legacy point of view, it's disappointing, but money is why they do these things. So there we go. That's the first little addendum I've done, but it was going to irritate me if I left that out. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.